Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer SS&C Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, or best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to see how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Hairston with SS&C Blue Prism. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Today, I'm excited to have as my guest Mike Bechtel, Chief Futurist of Deloitte Consulting. He and I will be discussing Deloitte's recently released Tech Trends 2023 report, for which Mike was executive editor. Welcome, Mike. Why don't you start us off with an introduction?
Well, thanks for having me, Brad. Hey, everybody. Mike Bechtel, Chief Futurist. That's the kind of title that gets people, I like to say that gets people leaning. They either lean in and say, oh, that sounds interesting, right? Or they lean back and say, oh, brother, here we go. But in reality, Brad, my team and I at Deloitte, we're in the business of helping our clients make sense of what's new and next in tech. Deloitte works globally, right? We're in every sector. We're in virtually every country. And so we have this catbird seat to make heads or tails out of little faces of the future that figure to become normal for the rest of us in the next couple of years. And so I always say, I ain't got a crystal ball. We ain't got a time machine, hot tub, DeLorean, or otherwise. What we have is sort of a journalistic understanding of what's new. And then we can divine the subset that figures to be what's next. Prior to that, I was an inventor turned investor, worked in tech R&D for 12 years, and then went to the other side of the table working as a VC for about 8 years. And I joke with friends, it gave me a master class in the difference between what's possible and what's profitable. So at the end of the day, man, I'm just here to help inoculate folks against snake oil.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Mike, I also saw that you are an adjunct professor at Notre Dame teaching corporate innovation. Is that right?
Yeah. Brad, it's super cool. And I'm super grateful to have the chance to teach generally, because you can't be much of a futurist if you don't believe that, the next generation is the literal future, right? That corporate innovation course, there are some skeptics who would say, hey, wait, that's an oxymoron, right? Innovators belong in startup land, not in corporate land. But one of the things I've learned over the years being an inventor and then frankly, as a VC is that intrapreneurship is real. Like there is a playbook for change making in the four walls of an established organization. And so, yeah, it's a righteous opportunity to help students figure out how to be, as I like to say, constructive innovators when somebody's paying your W-2, as opposed to the move fast and break things mojo, which doesn't fly well when you're collecting a salary.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, Mike, the 2023 Tech Trends report that Deloitte recently released is pretty fascinating stuff. It's 83 pages long, so we don't quite have the time to cover it in great detail, but I would like you to weigh in on the highlights of it. I think everyone will find it very interesting. At the beginning of the report, there's a mention of 6 macro technology forces, which are essentially the backbone of information technology. And these provide the framework for the 6 trends for 2023. Could you touch on these macro technology forces and what they are and why they're important for this report?
Sure, Brad. The thing that I've noticed and that our team has noticed as we've chronicled what's new, right, over 15 years here at Deloitte, is that there are trends within the trends, right? The wrong way to think about the future is to beat people over the brow with a blizzard of buzzwords, right? And for many reasons. A, people don't like too much of anything. But B, there's this crushing feeling that you're going to have to learn 6 new ones next year too, right? And so one of the things we've come to realize is that to do futures work right, you have to secretly be a historian. So we look back to the whole history of IT. And, in 7th grade, I was told, ENIAC, New Jersey, 1947. No, IT sort of started with Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace in 1842. They built the first general purpose computer, or at least designed it. Right? It was called the analytical engine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at a full scale model of this thing. It's the size of a Volkswagen at the Computer Science History Museum in Mountain View, California. And as I'm reading the liner notes, it was a trip because they were talking about 3 key subsystems of the first computer, but they were using farmer language because that's all they had in the 1840s. So it's like, it's a silo that holds arithmetic instead of grain. No, wait a minute. That's a database, man. Right? They're talking about a mill that crunches numbers like you might turn wheat to flour. I was like, oh, CPU, right? And then a reader, which was their anachronistic term for a UI. Well, what my team and I started to research, Brad, was these 3 systems: interaction, information, computation. Okay. Interface, database, number place.
Mm-hmm.
They've shown up differently throughout the last 160 years, but it's always been those 3 buckets. Right? Mm-hmm. And whether it was, PhDs with punch cards in a machine the size of a room, or, my dad's generation, right? Command line interface. Like, you didn't need a PhD, you went to night school. Or, my generation, where you didn't even need to learn to read because you had icons. Or my son, who doesn't even need good posture because he's just, thumbs, touch and swipe. The punchline is this: the manifestations change, but those 3 swim lanes have not. And so the first 3 macro forces: interaction, information, computation. It gets you maybe a more constructive way to think about the buzzwords du jour, right? Metaverse, AI, Web3. You're like, okay, it's what's next in interface, database, and number place. Now, for startups, that's all they tend to worry about, right? Pioneering, change making, better, faster, cheaper, stronger. But at Deloitte, what we've recognized is like established firms, established success stories, companies you've heard of. They can't move fast and break things, right? They need to steward what they have now if they hope to get to what they want next, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the 3 other forces that we look after: the business side of technology, right? The people, the process, the finance, the org stuff, the cyber and trust side. I like to casually call that the what could go wrong bucket, right? And then finally, the core modernization or legacy application renewal side. The idea that these rusty but trusty systems need to play nicely with your shiny new stuff. Together, those are the 6. 3 are eyes to the skies, right? 3 are the adulting that needs to happen if you're running a success story today.
Thank you for taking us through that. That's really, it's really an interesting way to frame up these trends. And so let's dive into them now. And I know there's 6 of them, which align to the 6 macro forces that you just talked about. And I'll just read them and then let you take us through them. The first trend is called Through the Glass, Immersive Internet for the Enterprise. Tell us about that one.
Well, the M word has had quite a ride over the last year, right? The metaverse. Now, as a proper geek, I was there reading Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash back in the mid 90s when he coined that term. And it's kind of like Bitcoin or blockchain. It's become so pregnant of a word where you immediately tend to get zealots on one end and skeptics on the other. But what we've seen with our clients, Brad, it's neither hero nor villain, right? This isn't a panacea or peril. Rather, we're seeing metaverse, or maybe more accurately, AR, VR technology as a rescue from what I've been calling peak screen. So, Brad, did you ever hear the term peak oil?
No.
So peak oil is this idea in the oil and gas sector that for both supply and demand reasons, we're going to hit this moment where oil was never needed more or more expensive than at some point, after which renewables and all the rest kick in. And so there will be a moment, we don't know exactly when, but we'll call it peak oil.
Okay.
Well, here's the analogy. I think, and our research suggests, that we're going to look back at right around 2020, 21, 22 as peak screen. Because if you look at our lived environment, right? You got screens that are this big. You got screens that are this big. Now they're on your wrist, right? Now they're on your head.
Mm-hmm.
How many glowing 16 by 9 pixel beds can we put into our lived environment? And so what if metaverse, what if AR, VR isn't yet another screen? What if we think of it as a simpler way to get through the glass? To say, and I like to call it BYOP, bring your own pixels, where, okay, I'm on a train. We spoke to a client in the Middle East. They're building a futuristic set of infrastructure, subways, trains. They're not going to be slapping OLEDs up on the wall, but they are going to be having big, beautiful windows with the expectation that the 2030 rider can look towards that screen and project the map, the schedule, the you are here, right? And so, in short, through the glass, immersive internet for the enterprise is basically this recognition that maybe, just maybe, this is a story about not shiny, but simple. And simple's only ever one. And so organizations would be wise to get on the simple train and start figuring out how they too can get beyond the glass.
Mike, when the metaverse comes up, people often associate it with gaming, but certainly there's lots of industries that stand to benefit from it in the near term. What are some examples that you can highlight for us?
It's a really good call up, Brad. I mean, emerging tech, I've been up to my neck in all things newfangled for, 25 years now. And one of the trends behind the trends that we've seen is that emerging things go typically from tech to toy on their route to finally becoming a tool. Right now, to your excellent point, immersive worlds are a gaming and entertainment play. And I read a stat, and I'd have to source it, that online gaming is worth more as a sector right now than Hollywood movies, right? It feels newfangled to me, as a Gen Xer, like, but it's true. Now, most of the metaverse business cases and use cases, value props we're seeing, they actually tend not to be out in the customer-facing domain yet. I think the first big beachhead is going to be two kinds of enterprise use. Number one, enterprise simulation, digital twins. We spoke with BMW, right? We spoke with NVIDIA, who are teaming up to create in silico AR, VR shop floors to tune and prune and get everything just so before they pour concrete. My dad used to say, like, measure twice, cut once. Well, AR, VR, metaverse, this is a way to measure 15,000 times and toss AI in for good measure. And by the time you're graduating from bits and pixels to atoms and muck, gosh darn well, you're doing it right. So that's use case A. I think it'll be a lot of manufacturing and industrials finding maybe less shiny uses, but inarguably business case positive ones. The other thing is going to be similarly cross-sector. It's training. A couple of years ago, we spoke to Walmart, who was early adopters of AR, VR tech to stimulate the unmatched madness of a Black Friday. Because you can't hire that many extras to come to the store and it's going to be like this. And to try to do that on a computer-based laptop screen training, not really. And so we spoke this year to Exelon, America's largest power utility. They said, we used to train people how to work on substations by flying them out on a good weather day and hoping they didn't get shocked. Now, they did more than hope. They were planful, right? As the tech leader said, you could look at those things wrong and they'll shock you. Well,
sure.
Similarly, computer-based training, you got it was cheaper, but it wasn't as good. In an AR, VR mode, these folks are able to actually say, hey, yeah, listen, I was in that experience and I learned what not to do.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, well, let's move on to trend number 2, which is opening up to AI, learning to trust our AI colleagues.
It's kind of a trip when you hear your own language back to you. Wow, that sounds crazy in the best possible way. And here's what we mean, Brad. I'm sure, for example, you and I were catching up and talking about how it's sometimes more instructive to think of this stuff not as rise of the robots, right? But as I've heard terms like inorganic colleagues. I think you mentioned silicon colleagues. But the thought is, 5 years ago, our clients were wondering to use or not to use AI. Right?
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, in our Deloitte Tech Trends, we talked about AI-fueled organizations and the recognition that if it can be automated, it probably should be automated, because the old trope about like, what about our jobs? Organizations, everybody I've talked to says, hallelujah, this frees people to work on better problems, higher order problems, right? I'll give you an example. We spoke with American Airlines. They had folks working from 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. every night to line up which plane stops at which gate, the plane gate, logistics conundrum. They're now able to do that in 2.5 minutes using an AI ML tool. What's interesting here, though, is not that, it's math to the rescue or automation for the win. I mean, that's great. What's interesting is that they realized this was a change management problem as much or more than an algorithm problem. When they talked to those folks, hey, a robot could do this, you could imagine the folks were understandably like, I don't keep those robots out of here, right? Instead, they worked with those logistics professionals to train and teach and coach that machine learning model. They used an open and explainable and transparent ML model. I'd like to say a glass box, not a black box. Why? Because people support what they help create. And in this instance, rather than coming at it as threatened critics, they felt the pride of almost like parenthood. And those folks were then able to get better gigs working during the daytime, dealing with weather delays and FAA surprises, you name it. But the real punchline here is, it's no longer, are you using AI or even which AI are you using? It's, are you building the change management processes, the visibility, the explainability, so that your, dare I say, carbon-based workforce can trust and get along with your silicon-based workforce?
Mike, that approach is really fascinating because there's so much emphasis today on the explainability of the AI algorithms, the transparency around what's happening in the black box. And so I loved what you just described, which is an approach for bringing the business along with you as you're implementing and designing the AI solution so that the trust is there from the very beginning. That's really powerful. Trend number 3, which is titled Above the Clouds, Taming Multi-Cloud Chaos. Talk about that one.
A similarly poetic title for what is a pretty in the weeds geeky concept. So get ready. Let's use a metaphor if we may, because I find it's the best way to really help this one land. Have you cut the cord on cable yet?
Yes, we have.
Yes. When did you join that party, if I might ask?
It's probably been 2 to 3 years ago, I think, that we did so. Yeah.
When my family and I cut the proverbial cord, AKA made that switch from cable television to streaming only, it felt a little scary, but it started to then feel like the biggest no-brainer of all time, because I could go from a couple $100s a month of a bunch of stuff I didn't need to $11 a month for this source of all these amazing things. But then a year later, I learned good news. There's another streaming service too. And so for only $20 a month, I can get even more stuff. And then a year later, hey, good news, right? There's another. And I think many of our listeners are kind of nodding and saying, yeah, I too now have 11 streaming services that cost as much or more than my old cable bill, with the added anti-bonus, right? That I think it's harder to find stuff. I mean, my son one day, it broke my heart. He's like, Dad, you're supposed to be a techie. Why can't our TV be easy? I said, oh. Well, what's this have to do with the cloud? It has everything to do with the cloud, because enterprise compute has followed the exact same path. At first, it was scary. You want me to move this stuff out of my basement into somebody else's basement? Are you crazy? Then you did it. This is amazing. I don't have to worry about infrastructure, platform. But then came multi-cloud. Well, I'm going to do this on GCP. I'm going to do that on Azure. I'm going to do this one on AWS. Then I've got rack space for this. And then I've got this bespoke thing we barely understand for this fifth one. Each of those, a penny wise decision, but in the macro, just like cutting the cord, a pound poor complexity, right? The value prop's still there, right? Money's being saved, but it's hard. It's complex. Where's my stuff? Am I using all of it? And so what we're starting to see is that the solve, the antidote for this, is beginning to show up as a new entrant that's showing up, quote unquote, above the cloud. You can call it meta cloud. You can call it super cloud. But the takeaway is a pane of glass that at the very least is trying to deliver observability into cloud data process management, but is striving to provide controllability. So, not to throw too many metaphors into it, but, not another ring, but Lord of the Rings style, one ring to rule them all. Simplicity as a service, we're projecting is going to be the new watchword of somebody come, Calgon, take me away. Somebody come in here and help me make sense of this rat's nest of stuff that I've assembled in incrementally wise decisions.
Okay. Let's move on to trend number 4, flexibility, the best ability, reimagining the tech workforce. Tell us about that.
For sure. So Brad, remember at the jump when we talked about that there were these 3 sort of pioneering forces, right? Faces of the future. Well, this starts our study of the grounding forces, that the adulting required if you're working in a big established org, right? My dear friend and colleague, fellow by the name of Khalid Kark, he runs a Deloitte study we call the Global Technology Leadership Study. And we interview nearly 1,000 technology leaders around the globe to make heads or tails out of what's top of mind. What are they doing? What are they not doing? Stock up, stock down, pulse, if you will. Well, as part of that research study, one of the big findings was the following. For 20 years, technology leaders have been hiring more in the way of deep specialists. Think of all the terms we've grown up with, right? The rock star developer, the 10X developer, the full stack engineer. Here's the rub. These people are exceedingly scarce. They are therefore exceedingly expensive. And so this competition, A, you spend a ton of time looking for this unicorn, but then B, when you find her, you pay a queen's ransom. And so what tech leaders are starting to admit is they're like, this war for talent, it's a race to nowhere. Now, and this is the big finding this year, when you marry that up with the fact that the half-life, the shelf life of any given emerging tech is now down to about 2.5 years, what you're finding is by the time you get that ninja, you need a new ninja because there's a new set of skills. So here's the takeaway. We talked with companies like Mercedes-Benz in Germany. They said, listen, it's not about deep specialists anymore. And no, that doesn't mean we're going to settle for shallow generalists, right? Jacks of all trades, master of none. They're finding a third way. And the third way is we're going to cultivate, we're going to curate, we're going to train serial specialists. And the idea, this is a kind of a coined term, serial specialization. The idea is, in Mercedes' case, with the European auto unions, which you can imagine are like, I don't know if you get any more regulated than an auto union and in Europe, right? It's like double trouble.
Right.
They were able to create job descriptions that said, your job is to become a master of whatever's needed for 3 to 5 years. And then you will be lifted up, moved over, and dropped into whatever's needed for the next 3 to 5 years. And we will train you and grow those skills, et cetera. And the reason this shows up as good news is also in our survey, what do technology employees want? They want mastery, but they also want variety. Serial specialization is an opportunity to change the weather every 3 to 4 years and allow for that horizontal growth en route to that vertical promotion. So in short, what does a tech leader do? Maybe we start looking not at the Jedi anymore, right? We start looking at curiosity, aptitude, and attitude. Said another way, it's the rise of the Renaissance men and women and the return of the polymath, who's been kind of missing from the recruiter profile for a generation.
Yeah. And many of those people might be within your organization already, right? You just need to take more stuff off their plate so they can build some of these new skills and change their focus, right?
Brad, we are the heroes we're looking for in a lot of these cases. And, I'm going to date myself here, total Gen X mojo. But there's this old classic movie, War Games, Matthew Broderick, pre-Ferris Bueller, right?
Sure.
Where, they're modeling global thermonuclear war, and they say the only way to win is not to play. Well,
Right.
there's this abundance concept here where if you're in a war for talent, there are going to be losers. You might very well be one. It's musical chairs, right? 8 people, 7 seats, or vice versa. When you're creating and curating talent, you're coming from a frame of abundance of look at all the stuff right in front of us.
Right. Okay, moving on to trend number 5. In us, we trust decentralized architectures and ecosystems. Tell us more.
So we talked earlier about the M word and how it has a bit of an image problem, metaverse. Well, I've never seen an emerging tech with a bigger image problem than blockchain, right? I mean, think about that origin story, right? A pseudonymous founder creating dark tools on a dark web to buy dark things. There's a lot of reasons why that didn't feel like enterprise grade for a long time. And then we got into this sort of period, maybe about 4 years ago, where it was the rise of the prototypes, right? Like cold supply chain tracking, provenance, you name it. I like to call that the shiny hammer era of blockchain, where we've got this thing. I've been told it's amazing. What do we do with it? Problem is a lot of those prototypes didn't scale because, Brad, between me, you, and in our smart audience, anytime you're starting with the shiny hammer, you're doing it wrong, because what's always mattered is rusty nails, right? Problems worth solving, lead with need. And too many of those early blockchain prototypes were leading with hammer. So here's the scoop. Despite recent cryptocurrency headlines and, all this FTX and all the other stuff that's been flying around, what we've actually seen is that we're able to tell that blockchain is increasingly ready for prime time, for enterprise grade, because the stories are no longer blockchain led. Rather, they're stories about distributed ecosystems, which sounds like a mouthful, so bear with me. But they're stories about multi-party business problems where no one actor can be reliably trusted to hold the master data. What if we think of blockchain not as what I just said earlier, right? But if we thought of it instead as a merely very useful means of re-engineering business processes across organizational boundaries. Like, that's the most IT thing ever, but it's true. Last year in our tech trends, Deloitte Tech Trends, we talked to a jeweler in Hong Kong. They said, listen, on this side, I've got synthetic grown lab diamonds who are competing against me and eroding my margin. On this side, I've got blood diamonds. And if you see the movie, you don't want to know where those come from. Right? Well, here's the rub. He said, how to show my customers that what I have is the real McCoy, ethically sourced. Well, check this out. He blew my mind. It was a master's class in Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. He says the Web 1 answer would be we'd have an About Us page on the website, right? It's a total 2002 vibes, like our 150-year tradition ensures that our stones are of the highest caliber. Because in Web 1, people cared what you said about yourself. The Web 2 answer, 2020, 2012 vibes, right, would be what other people said about you, right? Foursquare reviews, remember that? Yelp reviews, Facebook, Google, you name it. Because Web 2 was the idea of crowdsourced opinion. What matters is what others say about you. But as that's gotten sort of weaponized, fractionalized, right? In a world of alternative facts, right? In a world of shouting between political parties and you name it. Our research shows that trust in public institutions is at an all-time low, right? Trust in business, it's better, but it's still down. And so what if the real story behind blockchain is in us we trust, or maybe in cryptography we trust? And so in the case of that jeweler, check this out. They laser engrave each diamond with a serial, and they co-sign that with the GIA, the Gemological Institute. They put that on a public Ethereum blockchain. Why? So that when you say, can I trust that that stone is what you say it is? You don't have to
Mhm.
trust the local strip mall jeweler. You look it up on the blockchain, it is what it is. And it'll always
Hmm.
be what it is because you're not going to be able to kill that chain. So we're
Yes.
seeing it
Yeah.
used to obviate child labor in Africa, a Japanese public service consortium tracking provenance of cocoa. We're seeing all sorts of merely very useful means of getting out past cryptocurrency and into crypto trust.
I definitely share your positivity around blockchain finally moving forward. And I love the way you position that. I hope that will help industries like financial services, for example. We work in that industry quite a bit. Okay, our final trend, trend number 6, connect and extend. Mainframe modernization hits its stride. Please expand on that for us.
Well, there was an earlier title for this chapter that, if I'm being completely honest with you, Brad, and our audience, I sort of wish we stuck with. Maybe we can edit back because people really dig it. We used to call this chapter "Rusty but Trusty." Mainframe modernization hits its stride. Here's the scoop. Pendulums tend to swing, and by definition, they tend to overswing when you're talking business, right? There's a movement, and then it's typically followed by a counter movement. Well, for 10 years now, cloud, right? Even you're earlier, right? Joking. Would you like some more cloud in your cloud? Off-prem, your mess for less, lift and shift, pick your idiom, but, fortunes have been made and saved thanks to the elasticity and all the illities brought to us by cloud. Great. But here's the deal. 5 years ago, it felt like people carried almost like a degree of shame that they had high performing, COBOL driven systems doing jillion transactions per second in their back office banking system or insurance system, or you name it. And they were doing heroics and mental gymnastics, figuring out how to re-architect that to make it a breadth problem, not a depth problem, so that it can move to cloud. But as my friend and partner, our CTO at Deloitte, Bill Briggs, likes to say, sometimes doing nothing can be completely strategic if it's done with intentionality. And what we're seeing is that in this race to cloud and multi-cloud and all the stuff we hit on earlier, turns out that these systems, while rusty, are trusty. There's a lot to be said for doing a nightly enormous, actuarial batch on big metal. The new hotness is about connecting, is about wrapping these rusty but trusty systems so that they can connect to and begin to enjoy input-output to cloud-based AI, ML, right, blockchain systems. And so a great example, maybe my favorite in this space this year, we talked to the US Air Force and a collab with DARPA, right? DARPA, right, built the DARPANET or ARPANET, which became the internet, but they tend to kick out a lot of the really futuristic goodies, right? GPS, you name it. Those folks said they're building a system called Stitches that stitches together functional technical capabilities from across, right, the DoD. Plane guidance system here, trajectory modeling system there, ordnance optimization here. All these individual subroutines that have been written and perfected by brilliant people for the last 100 years. Those systems, about half of them live on old metal, right? Mainframe-based systems, stuff that we might have felt guilt over 5 years ago. But thanks to Stitches, you can type in the sort of system you want to stitch together, and it will sort of auto-magically build a taxonomy ontology to connect that old system to this new system to that system and pre-write a lot of the middleware stubs between and betwixt. And what's so cool there is they're connecting, they're embracing the fact that this stuff might be, a third of this composite architecture might be old, but it works. And if you're leading with need and business value, that's okay. And so in short, that's most of the story. Some of it is we're just seeing the rise of high performance computing, aka mainframes by another name, in the form of GPU supercompute showing up on-prem at some of our clients. And so the rumors of mainframes' demise greatly exaggerated.
It's a great way to sum that up. Yes. Well, Mike, thank you for going through those trends. As we wrap up today, I want to cite a quote I saw in the report that really stuck out to me. The future is already here, albeit unevenly distributed. Can you expand upon that? Where did that quote come from, and why did you find it important to put that in the report?
I'm grateful for your finding that one in there because, Brad, it's one of our favorites. William Gibson, science fiction author, 1982, neuromancer, somewhere around that year.
Okay.
He shared that quote because he was trying to lay out this juxtaposition that a lot of times people think that to plan for the future, they need a telescope, right? There's 3 cameras typically on a 2023 vintage phone, right? You've got the standard lens, and that's what most of us use in business all day. We think to look at the future, we need a telephoto lens, a long lens. But honestly, Brad, future's work done right requires the wide angle lens because the future's already being built by somebody. The thing is, they're probably not in your sector. They're definitely probably not in your building, right? There's more smart people outside of your 4 walls than there are inside. And that applies to the fanciest organization in the universe, right? And so back to the reason we do Deloitte Tech Trends, it's almost our responsibility working with companies around the globe to cross-pollinate some of these next practices to say, hey, insurance company, there's stuff at a space tech company that will blow your mind. But critically, and this is the surprise, hey, space tech company, there's stuff at that insurance company that would blow your mind too. And so innovation, straight up, Brad, as much about cross-pollination as it is about creativity.
Beautiful. Love it. Well, thank you. Thank you for expanding on that. And Mike, thank you so much for being on the show today to walk us through the highlights of the Tech Trends report. It's really an interesting read. I'll include the link to it in the show notes. And I think hopefully people will go and look at the full report and take some time to go through that. But thanks for joining again, and I wish you the very best in the new year.
Thanks for having me, Brad. It's been an absolute privilege to be with you.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you've heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how SS&C Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.